Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me here today in the Tangles and Toons channel. Today we're going to do a Zentangle drawing using three different tangle patterns, and we're going to start with just a little bit of preparation for our drawing, giving us some guidelines. So we'll use the traditional four corner dots and the border to get us started. Just using a simple straight border here to help frame our composition as we go. And then I'm going to take a 2-inch by 2-inch bijou tile, and I'm going to use it to draw an inner frame that's roughly centered here. It doesn't have to be perfectly so, but just roughly centered in the middle of our frame that we just drew. And I'm just going to trace the outline, or the outside of this rather, to create another marker that we're going to use for an inner border. So once we have that, I'll angle it here so you can see that a little better. You can see that we've got our outer and inner border. So now we can grab our pen and get to work. Now one of the things we're going to do in this composition is we're going to weave some of our tangles under and over our borders and over and under each other as well. So we want to think as we go about how we're going to layer things so that we don't draw a line that gives us a problem as we get down the road. But we're going to start with the tangle called Toodles. And as always, I will put the names and the attributions in the description box for the video. But we're going to start roughly in the center, and we're going to draw down towards this lower right-hand corner, and we're going to make a lazy S shape. Once we've done that, we're going to use a tethered aura to go back right along that same pathway and create a little space just like that. From the bottom, we're going to draw up a simple curved line that ends just like a fescue, but a little bit larger than normal. And by normal, I mean larger than when we're typically drawing just the fescue shape. It's usually quite small. And then we're going to start at the top here. We're going to draw a leaf shape that comes down and around like this. So you can give it some character if you'd like, but it basically has to make this pathway. And we're going to come down around here, just like that. And we've created our basic Toodles shape. And we'll go ahead and put some ink into these little spots here. These little sort of teardrop shapes that we put at the end of those lines. And I'm also going to draw orbs in this center seed or S shape that we created. And I'm going to nestle them right up against one another and just fill this area with those orbs. And once it gets to be too small to make another orb, we'll just stop there. Now we'll also take a moment and ink around those orbs, those circles, any little spaces that were created. We'll just add a little contrast by inking those in as well. All right, once we have that shape in place, we want to draw one more shape that's going to sort of start right about here and come up just beyond our inner frame that we made. So we're going to do that same exact shape, just kind of coming down like this. And you can add a subtle bit of variety to these if you want. It's the same pattern, so we're creating it the same way, but it doesn't have to look identical if you want to have more of an organic look to it. Now before we go to our next step in the framing and so on, we need to draw one additional of our tangle patterns that's going to weave over the top of our frame. So we have to put it in there now, and then the frame will be drawn in behind it. And we're going to use a tangle called Rixty3D. Now let me show you real quickly on a separate notepad here. Traditionally in Zentangle, Rixty is drawn It's a plant. It's drawn like this. We ink this little space in, and then we draw a shape around it. And then we can continue the process and add more of these and branches and so on. Rixty3D is a tangulation that was devised by Eni Oken, and it's very similar, except that instead of drawing those little triangle pieces here, we're going to draw a couple lines like that, and then we go outside of that to create a 3D or more filled out effect. And then instead of just stopping and continuing, we add an additional piece like this, and we give one side of it, depending on the angle that we draw it, a little side there, if you will, to make it look like it's got some dimension to it. So if we draw this up around here, I'm just doing a quick job here to show you. Once we create our another one, so we could imagine if we're kind of looking at it in this fashion here, that we might see the bottom side of this might appear more dimensional to us than the top side. So what I mean by that is, this being the bottom, we're going to bring this down like this and create some sense of dimension that carries on like that. So the idea being that we just want to give more of a 3D form to this than we traditionally do, and that's what we're going to do. So we'll go back to our tile, and we're going to create one of these Rixty3D shapes that goes over the top of our outer line and over the top here, but then it's going to go underneath this Toodles shape. So we'll start here, and I'm going to create that T line, add these inner lines that give some dimension, and now I'm going to also go to the outside of that. I'm going to put a slight curve in that line just because I want to angle it a certain way. And now we're going to come up here. Now, because I'm kind of facing this one head on, I'm not going to worry about going down to one of the sides. I'm just going to create those little shapes and assume that their dimension is facing away from me, so I can't see it. But now I can bring this up here, give a little curve, a little motion to it, and now we're going to draw this again. And this one's tipping just a little bit my way. My way, what am I trying to say? Toward the way of my hand. So I'm going to bring this up and just give it the littlest bit of a sideways piece there. And this one's going to come across just like that. Now we're assuming that this one goes around behind, so let's just say it comes out somewhere over here. Just like this. We're just connecting these pieces. You can draw them in any direction that you'd like, but you want to try to create some over and under shapes. And you'll see that here in a moment. So now this piece is going to go right up and off my page. Just like that. Before we draw any more of our tangle patterns, we can start to fill in our border so that we can now draw underneath the border after we've drawn that. So I'm going to use this line that I've created as a center line. So I'm going to draw the actual border on each side of it. So we're going to go like this. We're going down behind here. So I'm just staying roughly that same distance away from my pencil line the entire way. Comes out on this side, and we're going to just follow this around. Like that, and now we're going to draw the other side of that same border. And you could go on the line depending how far away you went and how thick you want it. And I'm going to go right about like this. So I'm not going to use the same amount of space on each side of my pencil line because I want to keep that border a certain thickness, so to speak. Okay, that gets that border in place. For right now, we'll worry about the other border here in just a moment. Let's think, I want to put another one of our Toodles shapes right in here, but it's going to go underneath this border and come back into this area. So we'll do our lazy S shape coming in here, kind of like that. And we'll draw our little lines here. Now this one's going to go right up in behind there, so I'm not going to be able to see that little seed shape or teardrop shape. And then we'll put those orbs in here as well. Now I want to draw another of the Toodles shapes, but I want that one to start underneath this border. So I have to get that in place first. So let's go ahead and draw at least this bottom portion. We're going to come and use that same kind of principle that we did just a moment ago. I'm going to bring it over here to the side. Something like that. And let's bring this edge here. So part of that's going to get lost behind our shapes, which is completely fine. And I'm going to draw this up just a little bit so I've got room to bring my shape across it. So now I want to, or underneath it I should say. So now we're going to bring another Rixty3D right here. Now we can also bring this other border the rest of the way up here. So we've got our base shapes in place already. So now we need to do our second stage, which I've decided to use a gray micron. And you could do the same if you have a gray pen like this or a gray marker of any kind, or you could use a pencil. Just a standard graphite pencil would have the same effect here. And what I'm going to do is draw some Printemps shapes just inside where this inner frame is. So I'm going to just draw those, and they're going to be lighter in the background, obviously. That's why I'm using that gray. And I want to make a bunch of these, and I want to make them overlap and go underneath each other and so on. Just create a little visual interest in terms of this pattern that we're creating here. And just have a little fun with it. Where it can go is totally and completely up to you. By using a lighter gray or your pencil, you're just going to allow that shape to recede into the background a bit without overtaking the drawing and competing with our other tangles, but it provides something, some visual interest, as we often say, in the background there. Now what we want to do, we could go back to our black pen, and we're going to do a little different background inside of this frame, but not anywhere else. Not outside and not inside where we've done the Printemps. And all I'm going to do is create some lines that are very closely, are very close to one another, I should say. Don't worry about super precision here or matching up the ends or anything like that. You just want to draw and fill in this entire background with some straight or vertical lines. And that's all we're doing here. And they don't have to be precise because we're creating, again, a visual interest with a texture in that background. So we just want to make it somewhat consistent, but it doesn't have to be super precise. We're not worried about measuring the space between things or making, like I said, the ends line up as you go through or behind another piece. Just don't worry about that. It's not necessary, and it's for texture only. The last step for that background that I want to do is I want to make little marks horizontally across these little lines, but not every line. So just watch for a moment. I'm just starting with the one right up against the frame. Then I'm going to skip a little space, and I'm not even worried about these spaces being consistent. I'm just going to do this different spacing. And I'm just adding a few hatch marks this way to create another sense of texture in here. Again, you don't have to precisely count how many lines it's going. Just use a visual space and create these opposing hatch marks so that we get some additional texture in that background. Almost like a wallpaper or something like that peeking out through there. But just every, so often try to be roughly consistent with the spacing between them, but you don't have to worry about counting lines or anything like that. It's not anything that's, rocket science here that we need to measure or else the project fails or anything like that. If you're one of those people that has to have everything super precise, well, then that's up to you. If you want to do that, you go ahead, but it's not necessary for the effect. So you can see what that did here. It just creates a pattern that distinguishes things in the background from the foreground and so on. Now we can move actually to our shading. So we're going to grab our pencils and let's add some shading. There's several ways we can shade each of these depending on your own personal preferences. But I'm going to shade not so much with light sourcing, but with obvious places where there's overlap and also where there would be parts hidden from the light or recessed from the light are going to be darker in the shading. So for example, inside of these 3D Rixty pieces, I'm going to add graphite there that I can blend. And maybe even a little bit along these sides that are supposed to be dimensional. On the Toodles, I like to do a little bit of overlap shading right here. Almost like this piece comes around and goes underneath it, tucks under. So I add a little graphite there. And I might even add just a tiny bit down these sides here that I can blend. What I want to do now is I want to shade my overlap areas. So anytime something goes over another something, whether it's a tangle or a frame, I'm going to add a little bit of graphite that I can smooth and blend outward. It gets to be a lot, so you got to look very carefully as you go around your drawing here and see where you want to include that. I'm even going to include the frame here on the inner frame. Where that goes over a piece, I'm going to add some shadow there. And as you can see, I'm laying down all the graphite before I do any shading. That's not required. Some people like to blend as they go per piece, so to speak. Sometimes that is helpful, but in my case here, I think it's going to be easier to try to get all the spaces. I'll be less likely to miss some of them that way. But so now I'm going to get my tortillon, and we're going to begin blending these details here. So I'm just gently rubbing this graphite, smoothing it out for a blend, but also to create a little more of a convincing shadow. Don't worry if it starts looking muddy in places. That's just because there's lots of shapes going on here with lots of details. So we need to try to accent. Of course, and it's going to make areas like this look much darker because they're overlapped by several pieces. So they would definitely be affected by any kind of shadow that was being created. So I think overall those shadows and the over and under enhancements seem to work pretty well. But let's have a little more fun with this and let's add some color. So I've selected a few different colors I'm going to do, and I'm going to color these Toodles shapes in a pinkish color. And that's just a personal choice for me because those shapes remind me of a bleeding heart plant. I know that's different, and if you've not seen a bleeding heart plant, you definitely got to look those up. It's an amazing flower that blooms in the shape of a heart with one petal that comes down out of the center that looks like it's bleeding, so to speak, or has a big drop of blood on it. And my grandmother used to have these bleeding heart bushes outside of her home when I was little, and I used to just be fascinated by them even as a kid, and I've come to really appreciate the beauty of those flowers now as an adult as well. But really neat, and this shape just kind of reminds me of that, so I'm using a color similar to those bleeding heart plants, but not trying to emulate or simulate those plants. It's just something that reminds me of them, so I thought I'd have some fun with that. And I'm just coloring this in. Oh, I see I missed a little bit of my shading here. I'm going to grab my tortillon and just lightly blend that center piece. I didn't know if the center shading was going to be that helpful or not, but we'll see. I think it just adds a little more form to that plant so it doesn't look quite so flat. So it is kind of nice to use that. And I'm just using, for my coloring here, by the way, I'm using alcohol markers. I like to use them for things like this because it has a sense of transparency to it. They're not super opaque. And it helps pick up the shading that we've done already, and also for blending different things that we may or may not do, or that you certainly could optionally do too if you wanted to blend colors and so on. They work really well for that sort of thing. I'm just using this fine tip. That's probably a better way to shade these, but I needed that fine point for control. And one thing on Zentangle paper or any quality paper, you might find that alcohol markers will they feather. It's called feathering. When they go into the fibers of the paper and they kind of spread out, you can see I hit a couple of my center points there too, which we can cover with white gel pen when we're all done. But just be aware of that as you get near the edges of things. You might have a little feathering going on, and that ink could drift into areas you didn't intend for it to. So And now I'm going to get a blue color. And I'm going to do a light blue, I think it's called a robin's egg nest. Robin's egg blue is what the title is. And I'm going to fill all of the Rixty3Ds with that. Before I get into some fine-tuned details, I want to take a purple pen and I'm going to shade, or color rather, both of my borders in this purple color. So I'm using a darker purple, as you can see. You could use any color, but I have a reason for this. This purple, I had certain selected colors available to me, so to do what I had thought about, I have to use colors that I have. So I've got a light and a dark purple, and I need to use both for my idea how I'm going to finish this. So you can see that, and you could do your own version of it, or like I said, you can leave it black and white, which still was a neat drawing, and just use shades of gray, whatever you would like to do. Okay. Now, what I wanted to do with my lighter colored purple, I wanted to separate these two framed areas a little further by everything that's within this inner, which would be our Printemps shapes, basically. I'm going to color with this lighter color purple. It's just a tonal difference and a difference of hue that will help that center to stand out a little bit more, or be distinguished a little bit more from the rest of the background. Now we need to add some highlights. So we want to get a white gel pen if you have one. So I'm going to create highlights on the Rixty, for example, on the opposite side that I've added shadow to. So kind of just these little highlights on the plant part and also on the stem or the vine. So alternating here a little bit just because of where the light was hitting it and the angle that I drew these shapes. Just like that. And a very similar thing on this one now. Just wherever you think there might be a little highlight that you can sneak in there. Again, in this case, we're not worrying about light sourcing. We just want to create an effect that is interesting to look at. And now on these, I'm going to assume that these are kind of puffy pieces here. So there might be like a highlight that would come around on these little forms. Those part of the leaves. And maybe even a little bit in these areas here. Just like where that rounding is coming in. I'm not going to put any highlights down there because I think that that is too much in the shadow there. But we might have one right here. And on this piece, just something like that that gives a little life to those pieces. Now, what about our frames? I'm going to assume a kind of a light on the one corner here. So I'm going to come around this way. This one would have it. And I think I'm going to put it on here like the light is coming almost straight down from the top if I wanted to think of light sourcing. But again, I'm not worried about that. I just want to make some highlight reflective lights here that just add some kind of a cool look to the overall drawing. And so when I look at that, I think that looks pretty good. Now the only other thing that we might do, we could add some shadows, some drop shadows around these pieces, but I'm afraid if we add shadows around everything where they might be off the backgrounds and so on, it's going to get too muddy. But what we could potentially do, let's see if I have a gray pen that will work. We maybe could add a little hint, or not hint, but a tone of gray to this other background, just in general. Let's see what that does. It might be too much, but let's just play with it here. Again, just to set that background away from us a little further by adding a different tonal change. You could use a pencil, of course, but I didn't want it to end up looking too muddy, so I'm just using a gray marker. If you don't have one, a pencil would work fine if you just used a really light hand and very carefully blended it just to make that background recede away a little bit further. Creates another level of distinction between our layers. I think that works pretty good. So with that, we can really sign our drawing. I think we are done for today. We used our Toodles, Rixty3D, and the Printemps. We framed it nicely in our little composition here. If you wanted, you could add some gel ink or something like that from a jelly roll pen to these middle circles if you wanted it. But I like that little touch of white in there. So I think I'm going to call that even for the day. And I am going to put my chop right down here. And that is the drawing for today. Well, I sure hope you had fun following along today, whether you watched or drew with me. But I hope you enjoyed the process, and I certainly look forward to seeing all of you again real soon back here in the Tangles and Toons channel. Until then, take care. Bye-bye now.